Welcome to my live stream. Sorry, there were some technical difficulties, but we are live. Made it, finally. Oh my gosh, today's story is kind of wild and totally unexpected. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Pokemon cards and with the multi-million dollar trading industry that has exploded when it comes to the process of buying, selling, and collecting cards now. But the industry has changed wildly, and it has some really unexpected connections to international crime syndicates that you maybe would never have assumed or even thought to connect. So today we're going to talk about Pokemon card trading and this very concerning pattern that has developed in relation to the practice, especially with the explosion of trading on platforms like Whatnot and on different live stream selling spaces. There's even discords that are entirely focused on connecting various buyers to specialized technology to get better awareness of when new Pokemon cards are going to be dropped, where they're going to be dropped, and at what time, so these people can get to those cards before anyone else. There's even some possibility and accusations of withholding information even on really, really, really well-known reputable platforms in relation to Pokemon cards and the actual quantity or stock that are available. Also, that the people who work within those spaces have access to those cards first. But hi, if you're new, hello, I'm glad you're here. My name's EC, and I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics. I have been on a bit of an unexpected break because I have had some pretty uncomfortable health issues recently, and I've had no choice but to just kind of deal with it. But I am hopefully back more consistently now, and I have been able to drop some new videos and started teaching myself how to make shorts, which is silly, but here we are. So I have at least been able to release a couple of new videos within that time frame. So of me not being able to do live streams. But I'm back. So today I wanted to talk about something that I personally am not involved in because I am not a Pokemon card collector, but I do know that it is a multi-million dollar industry, and Pokemon is actually one of the most popular franchises of all time. It is worth or valued at $150 billion when it comes to the shows, the cards, and the merchandise, in addition to theme parks, attractions, events, and things like that. So it is an incredibly lucrative franchise that is very connected to, I think, definitely more than one generation who has grown up with Pokemon as a major part of their childhood. I mean, I remember even, when I was a kid, I was a little bit like not exactly the age group or the demographic that it was marketed to, but my older sibling loved Pokemon. And we even had literal physical binders that looked like Pokedexes that were full of the cards that my sibling collected. I didn't know if it never occurred to me that they might have value, but especially since 2020, the value of Pokemon cards has absolutely had a massive resurgence. And that is in no small part to Logan Paul, because was it Logan Paul or Jake Paul? I do forget which one is which pretty consistently. I'm gonna check really quick. Okay, but yes. Logan Paul. Yes, okay. Logan Paul, he's sold actually a rare Pokemon card for $16.4 million because these cards, which originally were like $4 a pack, can individually sell for tens of thousands to millions of dollars, which is absolutely incredible. And it really, again, has spawned and does, I guess, depend on the quality of those cards. So an industry has developed around collecting Pokemon cards that goes far beyond the original point of the cards in the first place, which was entirely about, increasing awareness of the show and adding as well another opportunity for kids, because it was geared for children to continue their love of Pokemon and kind of expand their experience with the franchise. But Pokemon cards used to be a community, or at least people who collected Pokemon cards and played Pokemon were very much centered around a particular age group, and they were generally younger. But something happened. Kids grew up, and as they grew up, they did eventually want to revisit the nostalgia of having those cards and engaging with the games. But and that did spawn, I think, a resurgence in the Pokemon card gaming community, but it also encouraged a community that had been building for quite some time, ever since the first launch of the cards, that was a collector community. And what's surprising is that collector community actually ends up connecting to the Yakuza. Wouldn't have seen that coming, but yes, it does end up connecting to the Yakuza. And that's entirely because of the way that those cards end up being valued. So what I wanted to do today was kind of take you on this like winding little exploration of how this happened and some of the controversies that have happened in the Pokemon card space, especially in more recent times, because it is still a very current topic, a very current thing that is happening for lots of people when it comes to Pokemon. You are consistently having new generations of people discover Pokemon and fall in love with the game, fall in love with collecting, but you also at the same time have, as the game itself and the cards themselves gain notoriety, you have people with way less positive intentions attracted to it as well. And I think it's important to explore things like this because it's easy to assume, based on assumption about age or intended age of who's supposed to be interested in something, and the expected price point of the game and the cards themselves, that there wouldn't really be this illicit connection to something that actually is directly related to an international crime syndicate, like full-on mafia. But there is. So this is the story, I guess, of Pokemon cards and the very unexpected direction that they have taken since they were launched when Pokemon was launched in 1996. So Pokemon itself was a game that was launched because of an anime that was exploring, it's very much like a kind of, how do I even explain Pokemon? It's a little bit of all the genres that were really popular, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that were geared towards kids and about navigating major life struggles and growing up. And it was done through the lens of a protagonist named Ash and his friends as they went on a quest to collect as many Pokemon as they could and learn to battle those Pokemon for prestige and recognition. And of course, many lessons were learned along the way. But one of the things that the creators of Pokemon did very quickly was launch cards that replicated the Pokemon that were being connected to in the anime by the audience. And so eventually, all kinds of Pokemon cards were released as new generations of Pokemon were released with each new season. Pokemon actually started in 1996, but didn't end until I think 2014, that the final season was released. And that was a huge amount of time. So a lot of different people were able to become extraordinarily involved in the story. And as a result, in the games, the movies, the cards, and the merchandise associated, it is one of the most popular franchises of all time. So what ended up happening was a lot of what started out as kids collecting cards became pretty quickly a phenomenon of people idolizing very specific cards. And those cards were related to particular Pokemon characters. And whoever could get those cards very quickly learned to pay a lot more than the card was originally worth in order to have the card, because of the very strong community response that the card holder would receive from their community by having that card, as well as even some of the kind of little components within the game and the power that would be uh, connected within the game by having that card. So it would be things like having, I think it was like there's a particular card, a Charizard, that has specifications that means that now you can sell those cards for millions of dollars. And there are really intense specifications around what allows a card to be valued at a high quality versus a low quality. So even if you have, like, say you were one of the first generation of people to buy Pokemon cards, and you were, as a kid, and you got a bunch of packs of Pokemon cards at like $4 a pack, and you kept all of them in in little like binders and sleeves, and had them in an attic for years. If you pull them out now, even then, unless they are in incredibly pristine condition, far beyond what most people would recognize as pristine, you might not actually have a high value card. But when you do, those cards can be valued at tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. Logan Paul, when he opened up a full box of first edition cards, had the cards valued, and they were originally $1.5 million when he opened them. But after opening, he was actually able to sell them for even more, which is incredible. Now, part of the allure of Pokemon cards is the fact when you buy the packs, you don't know which cards you're going to get that are inside the pack. And I don't know if this is I don't think it's what spawned the concept of blind boxes by any means. I know that there was already a culture of card trading, especially in relation to baseball cards and in relation to sports. But Pokemon cards, I think, were a lot of people's first introduction to the concept of game or non-sports related collecting in when it came to cards, when it came to merchandise, when it came to that kind of medium. So it really opened up a lot of people to a field that, as children, is pure fun and games. But as people grew, and even then, there became like adults started to recognize something that, of course, as children, you weren't going to recognize. And that's that if something is valued very highly by a group of people, especially as that group grows into a larger and larger community, that thing can then be used for financial gain. And that is essentially exactly what has happened with Pokemon cards. So those packs that used to sell at $4 a pack even within the cards inside, if you got a card that was considered like a powerful card, a high value card, a well-regarded card, or a really rare and hard to find character card, you would have a lot of community response that was very positive. And whether or not that it was realized at the time, what that actually ended up doing was priming a whole new generation of people towards gambling. Now, that connection might not be obvious right now, but I'm going to get into it soon. So, what I wanted to talk about was a couple of different components that were going to lead us to the Yakuza, and as well things like the PSA and the current situation with Pokemon cards and some of the frustrations the community is experiencing. But I kind of wanted to start by following the story. So, where we are now, let's say it's, mid 90s, Pokemon cards have come out. They're very, very, very highly regarded, and many people are very excited about this. What starts out as a small community, but soon explodes internationally. And as the community explodes, it goes from being a really popular um, show and card game among children, and it becomes something that completely crosses any boundaries in relation to age or gender or traditional market expectations, because a lot of different people realize that there is a space for them within the Pokemon card and Pokemon community in general. So the Pokemon community becomes an international phenomenon, and very, very quickly, within a matter of barely even a year, Pokemon cards go from being a very, like a kind of side component of the Pokemon community to an entire separate community where you'll have people who do care very deeply about the show and the games and the associated merchandise and all the other components, but maybe care a lot more about just the cards, and especially the rare ones or the hard to track down ones or the hard to um, maintain ones. And that sparks the interest of traditional legitimized sellers and authenticators like the PSA. So real quick, I have to remind myself what the PSA stands for. I think it's the sports authentication. Is professional sports authenticator. Yes. So these are the same people who will authenticate really high value baseball cards or other kinds of trading cards, but generally towards sports. So I think Pokemon broke a lot of barriers because it was not a sport, but it became so popular that it was able to even break into and become one of the main focuses of a sports trading card authenticator. Now, PSA is one of the most highly regarded certifications you can get for your cards. It is very hard for serious collectors to be able to authenticate their cards and have the same community response to those cards as it would be if they went through the verification process with PSA. Now, that is actually something that is part of the problem with this whole story. So, the PSA has established a very strong reputation for many, many years as a leader in the collectible industry and in the sports industry for trading cards. And when it comes to utilizing trading cards as a collector's dream and the financial exchanges that can happen with that kind of interest, Pokemon is probably not the first thing you might think of as being on the same large scale social status as like baseball cards. But nowadays, if you think of a Pokemon card versus a baseball card, which one do you think is probably going to be more it's going to resonate more with millennials and younger generations? It's going to be Pokemon cards. Baseball cards were very, 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 very popular, and other sports related trading cards were very, very, very popular, but they didn't have the same power with generations post Pokemon that Pokemon does. And that was definitely noted by an industry that traditionally focused on concert venues and concert tickets, and those are scalpers. So, what used to be a very thriving community focused on, exchanging cards, playing games, and even on an international level, connecting communities all over the world through the love of Pokemon, Pokemon cards, and the games, shifted into something wildly different. So, one thing with Pokemon is that it was really, really popular in the 90s, but then in the mid 20, I think, when did Pokemon come out? Uh, in the mid 2010s, especially in 2020, um, Pokemon Go launched and it shifted. Oh, 2016. Okay. So Pokemon Go launched in 2016 and it revitalized a massive interest in Pokemon for people who had perhaps stepped away from the community or had, grown into a different space. And it reinvigorated the interest in Pokemon for a lot of people because suddenly you had a game that was kind of forcing people out of their homes, even still using their phones, and into their physical communities, exploring all over the places, going outside, doing all these things with for being kind of forced to meet other people who had similar interests and reestablishing the community on a grander scale. And at the same time as that is happening, of course, cards and Pokemon cards are going to become just as interesting to that community and to the new expansion of that community because of Pokemon Go. So you have this interesting, like, up and down process of Pokemon launching, becoming an international phenomenon that's getting sold out all over, but directly for children. And then in 2016, you have a invigoration of the community from people coming back into the fandom or discovering it for the first time. And in between that time period, something very interesting happens. Pokemon cards from the get-go had been a commodity that was valued very highly. But there was an unexpected shift in what they were capable of that many people who were part of the community would never have guessed. And that was money laundering. So, in the all from even as like early as some of their first launches, as soon as certain cards started to be valued highly enough that people would pay a lot more for those cards than their original market price or MSP, various groups started to realize that they could be a really helpful tool for combating a lot of the struggles that they had in regards to moving large amounts of money or being able to travel without getting essentially ticking off the authorities or even getting themselves surveilled. And so what people, especially the Yakuza, became very proficient at doing is using Pokemon cards to launder money they had made from other like criminal activities. Everything from trafficking to the drug industry to drug trafficking to any criminal enterprise that they were taking part in. If they needed to move or clean money, what they started doing is they realized that you could go out and use the cash or the money that you had made from these criminal enterprises and purchase Pokemon cards, especially if you focused on finding higher value Pokemon cards, which you could then travel with as easily as in your pocket. And you could have a stack of Pokemon cards, especially if you focused on finding the higher value ones. You could have a stack of Pokemon cards that would equal up to, $50,000. And it would be about this big. You could fit it in your pocket. You could fit it in a bag. You could fit it in a suit pocket. You could, move. You could travel from one country to another without alerting authorities and then be able to sell those cards in a different place for a higher value than what you originally bought them for, and then clean the money that you had used to purchase them for clean money. And so the Yakuza, especially at a time when they were experiencing a downturn in public sentiment, because there did used to be a very interesting reverence for the Yakuza in Japan in the 70s and the 80s, but by the mid 90s, that reverence had absolutely soured. There were magazines that used to be published that were kind of highlighting various bosses and families and tracking their exploits and kind of treating them as like these anti-heroes. But that definitely started to go on a massive downturn. And even the criminal enterprises that the Yakuza had been involved in, and the corruption and bribery that the Yakuza had been involved in, started to get massive crackdowns. So a lot of Yakuza ended up in prison, and their criminal enterprises started to lose money. And being able to operate without detection became harder and harder as there was a lot less, there were less people they could purchase their way out of when it came to dealing with the repercussions of their actions. So what ended up happening is the Yakuza decided to get inventive and started massively investing in Pokemon cards as a way to maintain criminal enterprises and engage people who perhaps weren't always even aware of what they were doing. They would be, given cash they had made from various like other criminal enterprises that was then cleaned by buying Pokemon cards and selling them elsewhere. And technically, you could still do that today, especially if wait a short amount of time or enough time and then you sell the card. One, you may even be able to value the card at a higher price point. Now, this, of course, was a little bit before PSA had become as involved in the authentication process of Pokemon cards. So when Pokemon hit its massive resurgence in 2016, there was definitely a lot more attention on the quality of cards that were being distributed and sold and resold in the collector market. So that did not last forever as a perfect opportunity for any like international crime syndicates, because the Yakuza were not the only ones doing this. It was actually something that also the triad in the Chinese mafias were doing, and not just it was a full range of different criminal syndicates throughout the world that had picked up on this practice and were doing this. And what that actually did also end up doing was it encouraged a practice of adults instead of children or the younger market that Pokemon cards were marketed to into the collector market and into also reselling. And it was not, I'm sure, intentional by any means, but some of those adults for sure did not have positive intentions in mind when they got into the collecting markets. So the power of the Pokemon as a money laundering scheme option did start to lessen as authentication became more normalized in the Pokemon card environment. But what is kind of incredible is that a almost entire new genre of people interested in that same goal of money instead of caring about Pokemon cards or caring about the communities or caring about the games or the show or any of the reason behind why there's a community in the first place, began to become more involved in the world of collecting and trading Pokemon cards. And you definitely saw an explosion of this after um, since after 2016, and by 2020 it was solidified. But a couple of other things also happened in 2020. And that was of course, because of COVID, you had a lot of people who were at home for possibly for extended periods of time, possibly the first time in their adult lives that they were able to like stay in their home spaces and not need to rush off to work, rush off to obligations, rush off to the normal grind of life. And a lot of people did turn towards nostalgia. And that meant that you had a lot of people who were becoming reinvested in things that really had brought them joy as children. And for a healthy like a healthy group of that population, that was Pokemon. So you see people who also were perhaps getting, if they were in the United States, getting stimulus checks. Unfortunately, I never got mine. But like, there were people who were getting stimulus checks and who were perhaps also still able to transition into working from home, who weren't spending money on the things that you normally have to when you are needing to travel back and forth from work and maintain your daily grind all the time. And if you have kids, extracurricular activities, there's all these things that suddenly you can't do, but you also then can't spend money on. There are people who may have had a little bit more spending money than they were used to. And so they started getting into hobbies. They started getting into collecting. People started getting into, various crafting and explorations of different fields. And for a lot of people, that field was Pokemon. So they got into Pokemon cards. A lot of people did. And they got into collecting. And so you started seeing a shift in who was deeply involved in the communities. You also saw a explosion of online communities surrounding Pokemon and Pokemon card collecting. There were a lot of YouTubers who were focusing on Pokemon cards and Pokemon card collecting. And as that rise happened, another thing happened. And that was the rise of live streaming and the rise of platforms that focused on making very quick sales, as well as giving more space to small creators to be able to sell to larger markets directly without the traditional requirements of like having maybe an LLC or all these different layers of licensing that you might have to traditionally have had, especially if you needed to go through the traditional method of a brick and mortar. Instead, you could sell stuff out of your house and ship it and maintain COVID regulations and actually create a legitimate business. And many, many people were able to invest in their interests and their crafts and their art in that way. And for collectors and for the Pokemon card community, it meant that there was an opportunity for many, many more people to connect with each other and actually all be able to get excited for each other as they collected various cards and exchanged and went through the whole process of building their repertoire. But something unfortunately very negative became immediately involved, and that was the practice of scalping and rip and ship. So I used to do live streaming for various brands, but specifically as well for brands that focused on more like cutesy, kawaii things. And a very big part of, I think, the brands that I worked for was this concept kind of rip and ship. Although I will say the brands I worked for didn't do what I'm about to explain, but the generalized idea was still the same. It was there would be a blind box series or a pack series of that was associated with a particular franchise. Could be Pokemon, it could be Digimon, it could be Sanrio in my case, it could be Sunny Angels, it could be Skull Pandas, it could be a range of different um, like items that you wouldn't know what was inside the box before you bought it, and then it would be opened while you were live on stream, and everybody in the stream would re- be very excited for you, and as the host would also be very excited for you if you got what you were excited about. Now, the when done ethically, it's a really positive experience and it's very cute. It's very fun. As someone who would, be the host in those situations many times, it was very exciting for people to be able to purchase a box from a series they were excited about and, you know, talk in chat about what they wanted from that series, which particular version they were excited and hoping they would get. And opening the boxes, opening those packs was really endorphin producing. So even me as a host, when people would get there would be of course one thing that started very early, and this was always a case with Pokemon cards, and became very much the case with many other um, similar styles of like blind boxes or packs or anything like that, where you don't know what you're going to get. There would be a secret version, a secret one that nobody knew what it looked like. And it would be included in every so many numbers of the boxes that you were opening. So you could possibly get this super secret version that is then very highly regarded by the community interested in that particular fandom. So if it's Pokemon, it would be maybe you'd get a really rare character that would be really hard to get otherwise. Maybe you would get an original character that would be really, really hard to get otherwise. There were a lot of really amazing opportunities to get this intense endorphin rush because you're live on a stream. You have a chat that is going absolutely nuts, and you have a person who is like jumping up and down, screaming and excited. And one of my jobs as a host was absolutely to ensure that if somebody was going to be purchasing something, they were going to have a positive experience with that. Also, I was very easily excited, so it didn't take much for me to be like, "Oh my God, you're kidding." Like that was exactly the mentality, and it created this intense rush excitement. So scalpers learned really quickly to even hours and hours before certain physical stores would launch items or launches for new series of Pokemon cards would be released online, they learned to basically be the first in line and to purchase as many of what was available as possible. And then what these especially scalpers and then rip and shippers as well, because there's actually two genres to this. I'm combining them a bit now, but I'm going to go into both of what those are in just a second. But especially with rip and ship online and on live streams, what would happen is they would utilize these tactics to essentially recreate a sense of gambling for the viewers. And especially because it's Pokemon cards, and Pokemon cards have, by this point in the mid 2020s, already become and been cemented in the community mindset as something that could have a really high value card, and those cards can sometimes equal several hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. There is a very real chance that you could basically hit the lottery just by purchasing the right pack. And so The scalpers and the rip and shippers knew this. And because you also had this environment of a live stream that for many, many people was being used very ethically and giving an opportunity for small businesses to connect to an audience and a community they would never be able to afford to do otherwise, you had this sense of goodwill that was being played off of. So what rip and shippers would do is they would really build up this excitement. They would host these like 3 to 4 hour live streams, and they would get this intense excitement to come out, and they would encourage the chat. And then they would open the packs, and if you got a good card, everything would go wild. And it would only maybe be like 30 seconds to a minute of technically of like profound response, but it became very addictive. And a lot of people very much go into these live streams hoping for that exact experience. And it can happen multiple times in a stream. But the thing is, every single time you're trying to get your luck of possibly getting a really good card, getting the positive community response from the chat of that live stream, you're also spending money. And when it comes to those live streams, it can be, depending on the platform that's being used to host the live stream, it can be very hard to hold the seller responsible. So what rip and shippers will do is they will go and they will buy, they will like get it down to a science of purchasing cards as soon as they're released, even going in person once COVID restrictions released, and making sure that they were some of the first people in these spaces to get cards. And then they would sell them on their live streams, and they would create an environment that was very similar to what happens in a casino. And it would recreate this sense of extreme endorphin rush anytime a person who purchased an item got something that was seen positively. Now, as restrictions were like eased as after, well, not that COVID is over, but now that COVID is not, the restrictions have eased and we are very much back in person for everything. Two genres of this type of, I guess you could say, what would you call these people? Opportunists came into play. You had scalpers who were very purposely going in person to these physical drops of Pokemon cards. And then you had rip and shippers who were selling those items on live streams. And scalpers, you may have seen videos of this on your For You page, but you may not have. You may now that I'm talking about it, but there would be like fights between grown men, like physically fighting each other in sometimes very intensely, to the degree police would have to get involved, just so that they could get their hands on as many cards as possible. And they would, scalpers would go to these physical locations. It could be a GameStop, it could be a Walmart, it could be any space where cards are being sold, and would pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to buy as many cases as they could and physically fight each other to get those cases, get them to their homes, and they would either sell them to rip and shippers or they would be a rip and ship live streamer themselves. And for scalpers, there is an entire set of Discord communities that is focused on finding when drops are and coordinating with each other in various parts of this, especially in the United States, within various states, various spaces, all over the country, to figure out when this was going to when these drops would happen so that they could physically get there. Sometimes they would get there night before, wait outside the store to be the first ones in, just to get these cards that are supposed to be selling for a affordable amount. every, just supposed to be regular cards that you can go and purchase and anybody would have access to. But then they would go turn around and make a profit because they would either sell them to rip and shippers who would have to pay above market value in order to get them, who would then charge their live stream audience above market value for those items. And or they would sell them themselves doing the same thing and still making a profit. So it can become a very lucrative business for people who are willing to view the cards as purely a money-making scheme. And the thing that really sucks about all of that is you still have kids who are excited to go get these cards, but you can't physically get them in stores. There was this one YouTuber who did an um, kind of an in-person exploration to go and see how many Pokemon cards are actually available at any of the stores within his state. And he drove all over the state of Massachusetts to try out different stores that listed themselves as having Pokemon cards available. It was included Targets, included Walmarts, it included GameStops. And he would sometimes even purchase cards online for pickup. But by the time he would get to the store, his order would be canceled and there would be no cards there. Now, this is another component that we're going to get into in just a second that actually speaks to something that might be going on even within these like reputable spaces, like platforms that sell Pokemon cards on a physical level in person. So, everything from Target, like I said, Target, Walmart, GameStop, there is a whole other world of selling that may be going on there. But every single time he could not find any cards. They were always empty. Curious. So as another thing that is happening, especially with rip and shippers, is there would be this very real, very frustrating component where rip and shippers, because they are they're doing something on a camera on a live stream, they would then be expected to ship out whatever that person had purchased, whatever their audience had purchased, and the audience would then expect to get what they had purchased. But sometimes rip and shippers would take a pack of cards and they would open them on a stream, show off the cards that the person had purchased, and then after the stream was over, reseal the card packs and sell them again. So, or they would not end up like sending all of the cards that they had that had been purchased. And so there was definitely a really, really frustrating phenomenon happening, especially on a particular platform. And that platform was Whatnot, where there still is a pretty healthy I guess you could say community of rip and shippers who will do exactly that. Sometimes they'll even be on camera and you can see them putting the cards back into a pack and resealing them with heat to then resell them later on in the stream, assuming that there's going to be enough of a turnover that nobody will notice. Other times you can also see if that the rip and shippers will have on stream looked through the cards, realized there was a really high value card that a person perhaps pulled, and then they'll remove that card to sell it later at a higher price so they can be sure that they sell the pack that has that card for a higher price. So it's definitely very much not good business practices. And so you have like this whole community that's starting, that's building and building. And that's all on, live streaming platforms. That's on, in person. But these are, again, things that are done mostly by uh, singular individuals, but it grows and it becomes something that even full companies will do. They will create bots to purchase within 30 seconds all the stock of a particular drop, especially if it's going to be a high value drop of new Pokemon cards. And they will present themselves as small business owners on these Rip and Ship live streams to try and play off of this idea that for anyone who is coming into the stream, that they might be supporting a small business and be able to connect directly to a person just trying to make their business successful. And there's actually secretly a very large business behind it, or a corporation behind it, or a much larger business than a singular person who is, creating these very systemized structures to try and play on, gambling psychology to encourage people to purchase as much as possible, and also to become essentially addicted to the experience of purchasing on live streams, and get them to come back and gamble more on what they might get. Because here's the one other thing with Rip and Shippers. If you if you are looking for, say, one thing that they will also do is they'll say that you're looking for a particular card. And if you do not get that card after they've opened the pack, then you don't get the pack. You pay for nothing. You don't receive anything. Which, how is that even legal? But because this isn't a regulated industry, it is something that's really hard to hold accountable. Whatnot, the platform actually ended up having a suit brought against it for that exact problem. There was like 12 different plaintiffs within this suit who were alleging that Whatnot had knowingly allowed Rip and Shippers to falsify whether or not people were actually receiving what they had been purchased, and also kind of essentially stealing what had been purchased in order to resell it again to another audience member, another consumer. And that is so sad. Oh, what? Did I miss something? Oh, never mind. Okay, sorry. I thought it was... Oh my gosh, I didn't see... I'm so sorry. Y'all, I didn't see anyone's chats this whole time on my thing. It's like, oh, I guess nobody's talking. So, no, I lie. There's so many people here. Hi. Oh my gosh. Sorry, y'all. I didn't see anyone's comments. Hi, Bobby Christine. Hi, Riley. Hello. Hey, Trey. Hey, Kiko. How are you? Y'all, I'm so silly. This is so sad. I'm so sorry. Hi, Marky Mark. Hello, hello. Oh my gosh. Oh man. Let me catch up on it, what y'all have been saying, because I've just been like blah, 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 blah. What? Bobby Christine, you found a 2014 Charizard that's worth 140? That's incredible. Oh. Yeah, Trey, also there is some, I think some definitely merits a conversation about Pokemon Go and the survey data that was being collected. Yeah. Yeah, Gecko is saying it was for AI military applications. Yeah. Oh, that is super. Okay, so Giga's also saying the original company who made Pokemon Go sold the gaming branch and then retained the data and sold it for military applications, or to a branch of military, using it for training data for their AI and surveying information. That is sad. Oh my gosh, Bobby Christine. Wait, you just found a $70 Espeon and a $140 Charizard? That's incredible. What? Yeah, I was gonna say, Geeko's saying that Bobby Christine's gonna find out that she's a millionaire by the end, and it's definitely gonna happen. Oh, Mark, you're a collector. Yeah, no, seriously. Well, that's exactly the problem is that you'll have like these people who are going into it who don't care at all about the art. They don't care about the game. They don't care about anything about the actual item. Oh, you thought we were just on? No, I am so sorry. I was not on a roll. I just didn't see that anybody was chatting. So, because it wasn't showing up on my thing. So I was like, oh, maybe, because I could see that there were people here, but I couldn't see that anybody was chatting. So I was like, oh, maybe people are just listening today. It's just totally fine. But I'm so sorry that I missed everybody's chats. I had to open up a separate window for it to show up. So, oh my gosh, that was so silly. Okay. Um, I wasn't even thinking about recording for uploading later. Ah, no. Thank you though. That was cool. Yes, Mark. Yes, actually, Logan Paul. Yes. So Logan Paul actually, in 2020 was another. Was it in 2020 that he did this? It might have been 2023. I just had that information up. Okay. 2026. This was in February. He sold a Pikachu for 16.492 million. Wow. But he originally bought it an entire original, like a original pack of, I think they're the like OG characters, and it was $101.5 million box, like worth of cards. And he sold one card for 16 point. That's wild. Most expensive Pokemon card ever sold this past February. Oh, y'all. What is with Logan Paul? Why is he always a mess? Thank you. Thank you, Kiko. They thought I was just cooking. Ah, that's so sweet. Thank you. Oh my gosh. No, I was just like, fever. Maybe I'm just fever rambling. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. Okay. The Arnold Palmer is bringing me life. All right. So where? Oh my god, I forgot. Where was I? Oh, right. So, yes, bots. That's it. So there's like a big discourse within the Pokemon community that has grown online, especially through Pokemon YouTubers, collectors that have talked about their collections and have really like grown this incredible community that is also still very focused on encouraging younger generations to get into Pokemon for the love of the cards, the game, the story, and even the morals that it represents. And the scalpers who are essentially stealing, like not stealing per se, well, they kind of are, but who are trying to swoop in and take the cards and purchase and buy out the cards for their own financial ends are actively dissuading and I would think discouraging younger kids from having access to that same just like experience of discovery and fun and community connection from having physical Pokemon cards or even being able to connect online. Bobby Christine, $100 Japanese Snorlax? Excuse me? What? Girl, this is amazing. This is so cool. I love that having this conversation is making you realize that you actually have a literal treasure trove. I mean, you have a literal treasure trove regardless, because you are a treasure. But I feel like that was not my smoothest compliment, but I hope it was well received. Uh, yes, please share the photos on Discord. I want to see. Yeah. Oh, okay. So also, I will say, once upon a time, and I did share this in like in the very beginning, but my elder sibling, who's a couple years older than me, was very into Pokemon and also very into Yu-Gi-Oh. both of those things. And I used to confuse what was what. Like I always thought a blue-eyed dragon was a Pokemon, and I was wrong. That's a Yu-Gi-Oh thing. Two separate things. um Yay, thank you, Barbara Christine. But yes, I thought those are two separate things. But my sibling had several binders that looked like Pokedexes and on the outside, and they were full of Pokemon cards. And they were like, my sibling was very, very into the entire process of having the cards, playing the games, and what? Mark, that's incredible! Congratulations. Mark says that they got a special illustration pull of a Green Ninja recently, which is worth $249. That's wild. Oh my gosh, you were into, was it Yu-Gi-Oh as well? Yeah, yeah. I don't remember what happened to all of the cards. I know that I do remember when we moved, there was a comment I think one of us made about like, someday these are probably going to be worth a lot of money. And then I don't know what happened to them. So I don't know if they got kept or not. But I I do wonder about that now. I wonder where they ended up, if they ended up falling into a collector's hands who was very excited about it. I hope so. I sincerely hope so. I hope they didn't end up in the trash. But uh, if my parents remember, I'm sure they'll tell me. I'll have to ask them. But yeah, okay. So, one thing that both the scalpers and the rip and shippers started doing, and these like kind of corporations that started to grow around this industry of essentially taking Pokemon cards and then creating this kind of gambling casino environment out of reselling them, was they start using AI and they start using bots to purposely um, buy out the market. And at the same time, and we're going to kind of circle back now to the kind of Target, Walmart, and GameStop issues that are happening here too, is there is the possibility, now this isn't confirmed by any means, but there is a possibility that even these massive brands, massive companies are listing themselves as having Pokemon cards, but not actually selling them in stores, even though they say that they do. Because anytime the cards are listed on the websites, it says that there aren't any in stock. And when they are supposed to be in stock, like that one YouTuber that I was talking about earlier, when they are supposed to be in stock, for example, that YouTuber went to purchase them online for pickup. By the time he got to the store, the order had been canceled and there were none in stock, even though there were multiple that had been before. So one of the theories is that either the people who are working in the store themselves are zeroing out the amount or the product and distributing it among themselves, or they are not actually being sold in person, even if they are supposed to be. So that is kind of another concerning component of this that is really hard to track down and verify. It's simply a matter of there not being anything in person. Even when people, even when there's an announcement that Pokemon cards have been restocked and are going to be available, sometimes you will have like people lining up to purchase these cards, and it could be even parents bringing their kids who are excited to pass on the love of Pokemon to their kids, and then there's nothing there for them. There's no connecting experience. There's no way to have their own experience of getting those cards. That was also one thing that I remembered from when I worked in that like kind of live stream environment. Is there was a physical store as well, and a lot of people would come in and be like, "Do you have Pokemon cards?" And I remember thinking, "Oh God, Pokemon cards must be so easy to find. Why would they come in here?" Little did I know It's not actually easy to find them. Now, I haven't even talked about trading shows or conventions that are about Pokemon cards, but there is a further level that the scalpers have descended to that have actually resulted in serious crimes taking place, where people have started to, on a large scale, even far outside of the community, partly due to the scalpers and these rip and shippers, that people have realized that there is a lot of money within this trading community. So, and collecting community. So, one thing that certain collectors who are more open about their collections because they are, influencers or YouTubers or creators who have an online presence, is they've noticed that if they go to conventions or if they go in person and document um, their collection experience, there has become a new need to ensure their own safety because there are now groups of people who will put trackers on the cars of serious collectors, not to get, try and attain their collection that they just purchased outside of a convention, but instead to follow them home and break into their homes to get their entire collection or as much of it as they can amass. Because what you can pick up in your hands could be like hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are multiple cases of thieves who have broken into stores, like again, like GameStops or trading card stores, and have made, yes, Mark, exactly, actual real life Team Rocket, 100%, but with none of the charm or style or James. This is very odd. Rose. Like none of it. None of it. You don't get any of the fun. You just get the sads. But yes. So there have been these thieves who have broken into these stores and will break the cases and make off with whatever they can hold. And they can be up like I think the highest amount that I saw was somebody was able within a matter of minutes to make off with $500,000 worth of cards. And because the cards, even if they are authenticated, don't have serial numbers, there is no way to track those cards. So, what the Yakuza started has absolutely been continued by essentially a new generation of people who are looking to make money out of the cards because they are one of the easiest ways to be able to have outside of the actual danger of being identified through CCTV when committing the actual crime of breaking and entering and committing a theft and destruction of property and all of those components. Outside of that actually getting rid of the what would be the evidence would be ridiculously easy when it comes to fencing those items. Significantly easier than almost any other item that you could steal and fence. And it's also very concerning because not only do you have people doing that in the kind of, I guess, the more assumed way of breaking and entering into a physical store at conventions, now you also have people who are uh, who have become very adept at like stealing things from vendors' tables and making off with them. And or you'll have people who are creating fakes. Now, this has been an issue since the onset of the cards as a whole, where many people thought that they had purchased real card packs but hadn't. And the fakes are in three tiers, essentially. There's the ones that are identifiable by naked eye that the average person would maybe not be able to recognize as fakes, but anybody who is familiar with the cards would. And then there's the second level, which is where the fakes are quite close to the original. but they are you would definitely need a significantly more experienced and discerning eye to be able to tell that they're fakes at all. So even if you are somebody who is a consistent collector of cards or participates in the games, you maybe wouldn't ever be able to identify that those are not legitimate cards. People are even able to create fake PSA authentication um, tags for the cards. And the PSA has become the number one way to authenticate Pokemon cards. So if you can even create essentially the stamp of approval from the one of the only reputable um, authenticators, you can get away with quite a lot. And the final level is when the differences are so hard to tell that you would have to be practically a professional authenticator to know. So even really professional collectors can be fooled by and into purchasing cards that are completely fake, that have the PSA authentication, that have to almost every level a what seems every indicator of it being the right and real card. So it can be really, really tough to know if you have a real card or not. And these fake cards have been in circulation since the 90s, since the launch of Pokemon cards, because there have been people who have been like from the onset that this became a phenomenon. Um, at any scale, immediately there were people who were selling fakes. I actually also saw a documentary that was exploring this in the mid late 90s where they were interviewing kids because the primary market of Pokemon cards at that time were children, and kids were talking about how even friends of theirs had paid $80 for a singular card that turned out to be fake. And this was before authentication by the PSA was more normalized by many years. So even at that level and that early into this this experience, it was part of the very real minefield that as a collector or as a fan you would have to navigate. And um, there is even more. I know, you're like, it's like, how? But there is. So, so far, let's kind of do a bit of a review. We've talked about how um, the Yakuza have actually used Pokemon cards to launder money from criminal activities to clean money because they're easy to transport internationally, and they are, even to this day, still not something most people would know to have their eye out for. Even trained, investigators wouldn't always, unless they worked consistently with uh, with the Yakuza or with anybody who has participated in this money laundering scheme before, wouldn't always know to check for Pokemon cards. Sometimes they would even have like drug busts within the United States of different syndicate chapters from various different mafias and gangs, and the FBI or the CIA, whoever it is that was doing those busts would kind of in passing realize that there were these piles of Pokemon cards and just not recognize why they were important. Why there would be this pattern of there being so many Pokemon cards in addition to, all of the drugs they were busting or all of the dirty money that they were also busting or whatever other criminal activity that they were um, arresting these groups of people or whoever it was they were after for. And it would still allow those cards to then be distributed back into the community. And in that process as well, you had people who were distributing fakes within that. So you have this like multi-level of like fake cards being distributed. You have cards being used for money laundering. You have Oh my gosh. So you have people who are already starting to recognize how lucrative of a business it could be to take advantage of the community and these cards. And as time passes, you see the development of a kind of resurgence of interest in Pokemon and a resurgence of interest in the financial component of collecting cards and selling them. So you see the rise of scalpers, you see the rise of rip and shippers that are generally on a smaller scale through live streaming, through online platforms, and even through um, conventions and trading meetups. But it grows into actual corporations that present themselves as small streamers or smaller groups to avoid detection for the very real, essentially gambling casino style environment that is being built and is not being acknowledged as a almost purposeful gambling industry. Um, and then you have things like Logan Paul being able to sell or purchase like a $1.5 million box of Pokemon cards and sell a singular card from that box for 16.4 million. It's nuts. And you now also have this possibility of these large scale corporations that are supposed to be just mainstays of selling those cards to begin with, suddenly not having any on their shelves because why exactly? We don't know. There's no way to prove exactly what's going on, but there is the possibility, and it has been posited, that those cards either never were truly physically in stock to begin with, or they are being distributed within um, the I guess, behind the scenes by people who work at that company. Um, but there's more. So one of the I've talked many, I think I've brought up PSA many, many times so far throughout this conversation and the story. But one thing that is very concerning is there is a lot of concern around PSA and the fact that it is now considered and has been for several years one of the only spaces you can get Pokemon cards properly authenticated. And there is a process to authenticating Pokemon cards. You can submit your cards for a authentication. You have to pay a fee and then you will receive a grade on that card. And you then that qualifies the worth and value of what that card is. So it goes from 1 to 10. And a card that is a 10 is, of course, the highest level you can get. So very serious collectors and anybody who is trying to either, sell their collections and trade their collections in, reputable spaces, or is a collector who just wants to authenticate their cards and ensure they have real cards that are in the quality that is considered like the proper quality, would need to get their cards authenticated by PSA. There are other groups who can authenticate cards, but because of the community connection to PSA, because PSA was one of the first and one of the oldest authenticating businesses that has traditionally authenticated trading cards specifically for sports, it has a very strong reputation and it kind of has a chokehold on the industry. So even if you went elsewhere to get your cards authenticated, if you then wanted to turn around and sell those same cards into the market, if they don't have the PSA stamp of approval, most people are not going to feel comfortable buying them because they're going to assume that maybe you're not really selling what you say you're selling. The thing is, PSA has been caught multiple times doing this very concerning thing where and this has been documented by various Pokemon card YouTubers who have, say several thousand cards. They will send their cards in to get authenticated. And their cards are supposed to pass essentially specific quality checks to reach a certain level of authentication, to receive certain grades. And that determination is made by people who are supposed to be very highly trained in the authentication process. So, some of these YouTubers have discovered that their cards will be returned to them, and the authentication that is being given is surprisingly low compared to what the standards are known to be. And the YouTubers were like, this is a little weird. And then they will send their cards back in, which means that they have to pay for every single card that they have to send back in, wait for a period of time, and then hope that their card is returned to them. Problem is, sometimes, even after going through a second round of authentication, it might not change the grade that you get, and it could even lower it if you get somebody else who has a different standard of what authenticated means, even if it falls within the perimeters and the boundaries of what authentication is supposed to be. So one thing that certain YouTubers noticed is that PSA will sometimes take in cards and rate the card at, say, a 9 out of 10. And then they will offer to buy the card at a particular price point. And again, these cards can be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in that range. But it can make a massive difference between a card being like $1,500 or $10,000 to $16,000 based on a singular grade. And what these YouTubers have noticed is that if they would send their cards in, their cards would get rated as a 9 or an 8. PSA would offer to purchase them. And if the YouTubers sold the card at that level, they would notice their cards were back in circulation, having been regraded at a 10 and sold by PSA at a 10. Because PSA is absolutely doing a conflict of interest where they are not just authenticating cards, they're appraising and reselling them themselves. So if the only method you have of authenticating a card, which can mean the difference of tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, is on the line, and there's only one reputable source that is widely accepted, and that reputable source has a vested financial interest in purchasing those cards and reselling them, how are you supposed to trust that you can actually use that authenticator? You can't. Bobby Christine says grading is such a racket. Yeah, it really can be. I think it's meant to be like a way to establish quality control and ensure that the rampant what's it called? What's the word? Faking of cards doesn't happen, because has been a very big issue within the community, but largely from these kind of outside sources that are just attempting to find a way to make money and use the community to make money. But if the only source you have is doing this, what are you supposed to do? Now, what these YouTubers had to do, and there was, again, more than one where they noticed that their cards would be graded at anywhere from a 8 to a 9, and then if they accepted the appraisal from PSA, they noticed that their cards were then being sold at a level 10. They would then go to the online and they would blast PSA, and they would get enough, and this has only happened like 2 to 3 times where the YouTubers had enough of a platform that they were able to get enough community response to actually have PSA held accountable. And then PSA would essentially settle like it was in court, but settle with those people separately. So, and then the YouTubers would have to call off essentially the onslaught online. But that's not the worst of it. The PSA actually had one specific card collector who had a card that was so rare that it was one of, I think it was the only one known in existence that had survived to at the level that it was of like um perfection that it was, where it didn't have any of the like bends or rips or tears or physical anything that had happened to the card. So it was in peak condition. And there was only, I think, 400 of those cards made, and only one that this one particular that had been I guess circulated. And there was this collector who had that one card and would have been near impossible for this collector to replace or find another one. And PSA, after he sent in his card to essentially be re-sleeved in a protective covering, got back a card that was heavily damaged and downgraded from a 10 to a 6, which meant that it was a $64,000 card. And it was reduced to barely $1,000, like a little over $1,000. Lost so much. Oh, it wasn't $1,000, 20,000. I take that back. Please don't. I lied accidentally. But yes, he lost $20,000 on one card because PSA had done some kind of something to his card, had damaged it to such an extent. And there is some conspiracy that that's exactly the thing. Geeko's saying, what prevents one from making a new one and claiming it's in perfect shape? Well, I think the issue is the level of and printing and style that you would have to be able to accomplish. Because yeah, Bobby Christine's like, that's so much money, lawyers gotta get involved. Yeah. Yeah. Because I could lose my mind on the spot. Absolutely. I think if that particular collector had not raised a huge, huge outcry online, the likelihood would have been that he would have been pushed aside eventually, unless he pursued legal action. And PSA is a international group that has an incredible amount of power. It is one of the only authenticators in the world that can be recognized internationally within the community. So if you can't get that one group, that one organization to work with you, it would be a mess. It would be absolutely a mess. So what the there was a conspiracy theory that was kind of also discussed by Moist Critical at the time, where there were some people who were positing that perhaps exactly what Giko was saying happened, where the PSA perhaps had taken the card and replaced it with either a copy, or perhaps they did have another one of the original cards, but it was not in good condition, and sent that one back to the collector. There's no way to know. But eventually, the collector was able to settle with PSA and get the money that he should have had from his card back to him. But it didn't fix his card. His card was forever ruined, either by negligence or by this conspiracy theory. There's no way to know. But it is definitely a card that would have been impossible for him to replace, because there was almost none that had the same level of quality that his had, that he had been able to keep in such pristine condition for so long. And this had happened, I think, like a year and a half ago, if not even. It was very recent. So can you imagine holding onto one particular card in such pristine condition from like it was, I think it came out in like 1999 or early 2000. So that's like 20 plus years of 26 years minimum of keeping one singular card in pristine condition. That's wild to me. That's wild. And to have sent that off to the one space that is supposed to be internationally renowned for valuing cards and treating them correctly, and something goes so horribly wrong like that. Yeah, yeah. Like Trey said, I'd lose my mind too. I would absolutely lose my mind. Um, but yeah, and it's kind of wild because at our present state within like Pokemon card trading in the community, things have absolutely escalated because of scalpers and rip and shippers to the degree that now, when going to conventions, collectors have to be mindful that they may have trackers left on their cards, that they may get followed home so that people can break in and steal their entire collections. And God knows what could happen to them in the meantime. Like, there is a definitely, this was not the original intent or purpose, but it is again, Pokemon is $150 billion franchise. So it is the most popular, one of the most popular franchises in history. And it's only going to continue to be so. But when you do have these types of scalpers and these rip and shippers and these basically these kind of this recreation of gambling in online casinos in spaces that aren't age verified. So you can have children that will jump into these live streams who will absolutely become enthralled because they're children. They don't have the wherewithal to be able to recognize the danger that they might be getting in. Yeah, Bobby Christine is saying it's a crazy situation where if they, meaning PSA, do their job poorly, they basically rob you. Very, very true. That's very, very true. But phew, can you believe that? I to think there's so many surprising connections to the degree that, would you have ever assumed that Pokemon cards could be used for money laundering? Now that I know about it, it makes so much sense. I'm actually surprised it's not used more with not just Pokemon cards, but also like when you think of all the other kind of trading items that you could launder money through. Um, Cards especially would be easier. Although I imagine now with the process of authentication and the way that the industry has changed due to the shift from things being so purely in person to also now being online, there is a lot more being recorded. It might be a little bit harder to get away with some of that, but it is still technically something that could happen, like where people could use it for exactly that purpose. And that is terrifying for a game that is supposed to be in cards that are supposed to be focused on a very moralistic tale that has a lot of nostalgia and is technically meant for kids. These are not the connections I would have assumed. But yeah. So I guess that is the kind of crazy story of how Pokemon cards have connected from everything from the Yakuza to online live stream casinos. Man. Also, I'm starting to lose my voice. But thank you for everybody for jumping into my stream today and also for following me along on this absolutely kind of wild ride. I definitely have noticed a lot more conversation about this topic um, recently. I'm sure there's things that I may have forgotten in my telling of this whole wild situation. But if there's anything that y'all are curious about or find out more about, please, please, please make sure to drop it in the comments so that we can continue the conversation there and can see what else we can discover about this very surprising situation. But also, thank you for letting me go on a roll. I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Y'all were hanging out and talking, and I couldn't even see it, but it's okay. It's okay. I will fix that by the time I stream next. So, yeah. Thank you, Bobby Christine. Yay! Yee! Oh, also, I released finally a new video. I did run into a very surprising issue with the upload of that. For some reason it uploaded like I uploaded it and was still working on some of the components of like the description and the thumbnail and stuff, and it posted 2 days early at midnight. And I couldn't fix it. So I thought I'd fixed it. I thought it was coming out at 10 a.m. on Sunday. It did not. So it's, if you didn't see any notifications or updates for that, it's because there was an issue. But yes, please go watch it and tell me what you think. I'm really curious about what everybody thinks about it. I want to know y'all's thoughts. We had a brief discussion about the main context of that video at an earlier live stream, but I found out so much more and it's so interesting, and I was not expecting things to go in that direction. So I can't wait to know what you all think. But yeah, and of course, thank you so much, Kiko. Thank you, thank you. And oh, thank you, Trey. Thank you. But yes, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping in tonight and for the conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I will see you all again very soon.